All right, good morning. So we're continuing in the new, the second quarterly, illusions, images, and symbols, how to study Bible prophecy. Today's lesson is Tuesday, April 29th, Daniel 7. The dream of Daniel 2 was first presented to a Babylon king. The vision of Daniel 7, in contrast, was presented to a Hebrew prophet, a member of God's covenant people. Daniel is shown the same subject as was Nebuchadnezzar, but from a different perspective. Instead of a statue, he sees a series of nations rising up out of the sea, the result of wind churning up the water. These nations were in a continual state of strife, causing a perpetual shift in power among them. Such passages as Psalms 65, 5-8, Isaiah 17, 12 and 13, and Jeremiah 46, 7 and 8 use the analogy of floods and waves to depict the tumult among the nations. In contrast, the Promised Land existed, at least for a period of time, as an island of peace and safety amid the sea of Gentile kingdoms, a sacred nation established on the solid foundation of God's government, as opposed to the unruly nations around it. And that's largely still how it is today. I know the news tries to tell you different, but I happen to believe that if all the nations that surround Israel would lay down their weapons, there'd be peace. But if Israel were to lay down her weapons, there'd be a bloodbath. That's my own personal opinion. I stand with Israel. Read Daniel 7, 1-3. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, in the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up out of the sea. Each was different from the other. So three, right? Yeah, 1 to 3. Each was different from the other. There's a lot of movement in this scene. What lessons can we draw from this imagery, such as the beast first arising from the sea? Well, I mean, it's pretty much spelled out there. The sea's churning. It depicts strife. There's a lot of strife. There's wars, rumors of wars. There's political unrest everywhere. So that's kind of what it's saying. Daniel watches as the chaos of Gentile warfare from the shore, when suddenly the beast starts coming up onto the land, into his territory. Gentile problems had now become his people's problems. They had chosen to live like Gentiles, so now they would live with and under Gentiles. Starting with Babylonian domination, God's covenant people never again enjoyed complete or long-lasting autonomy. This loss of autonomy for God's people today will persist until the close of time, when Christ is finally restored to his rightful place as our King. In the New Testament, God's people continued to suffer under the thumb of the Roman Empire, and then under the persecutions of the little horn, pagan Rome's successor. Though historically some nations have been better than others, and some eras have been more peaceful than others, the vast majority of the history of nations, peoples, and empires has simply been going from one tragedy to another, from one oppressor to another. And often this is all done under rulers claiming only the best of intentions for their own people. What a contrast to rule that God had wanted for his people, if only they would have chosen it. Alright, discussion questions. How does Romans 3:10-19 help explain so much of our world? Well, Romans 3:10-19. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. Well, we can stop right there. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. They have all turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poisons of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways. And the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. What lessons can we draw from this? Whoops, wrong page. Sorry. Nope, yeah, right page. Wrong thing. How does the verse 19 especially show why we so desperately need the gospel for our lives? Well, it says, now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Well, I mean, the law is what? Reading that only confused me. I'm sorry. How does verse 19 especially show why we so desperately need the gospel in our lives? Probably because those under the law are doomed for the punishment that is depicted under the law. But the gospel says that God took our punishment. So while the law still exists, we're no longer under the penalty of the law. That's probably what they're trying to get at. Anyway, so yeah, that's the gospel in a nutshell. We're no longer under the penalty of the law, and we, being Gentiles, are invited to come up to heaven. Jesus' invitation is for everyone. If you feel that pull, give your heart to Jesus. And look for a church. I'm not going to tell you which church to look for. Ask God. He'll tell you which church to look for. Which, I know some people in my church will be like, no, tell them to come to my church. Well, I mean, yeah. A lot of people have been told to go to the Seventh-day Adventist church, but a lot of people have been told to go to others. God will put you where He needs you. Anyway, have a nice day.